Some questions are simple. Others reveal everything we've been avoiding for decades. When Barbara and Richard Cooper stepped up to the Family Feud podium in January 2025, they looked like the picture of a successful long-term marriage. 30 years together, 3 grown children, a comfortable life in suburban Chicago. But when Steve Harvey asked a routine question about marriage, Barbara's answer didn't just shock the studio. It exposed a truth that had been buried for 3 decades. What followed was one of the most raw and painful moments in Family Feud history, proving that sometimes the longest marriages hide the deepest wounds. And sometimes it takes a game show question to finally force couples to face what they've been running from for years. If you believe in the power of truth, even when it's painful, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We share the Family Feud moments that show us marriage isn't about perfection. It's about honesty, even when honesty hurts. The Cooper family entered the Family Feud studio with practiced smiles and coordinated navy blue outfits. Richard Cooper, 62, was a recently retired bank executive with the polished demeanor of someone used to being in control. His wife Barbara, 60, was a librarian who carried herself with quiet dignity. Their adult children, Michael, 28, Sarah, 26, and Jennifer, 23, stood with them, along with Richard's brother Tom. To the casual observer, the Coopers embodied the American dream. They had built a life together, raised successful children, and reached retirement with financial security. They held hands during the introductions. They smiled at each other appropriately. They presented as a couple who had weathered 3 decades together and emerged stronger. But Steve Harvey, with his years of experience reading people and marriages, noticed something. Barbara's smile never quite reached her eyes. When Richard spoke about their marriage, Barbara's expression went blank. When Richard put his arm around her, she stiffened almost imperceptibly. These were small tells, subtle signs that something beneath the surface wasn't quite right. Barbara Cooper had become an expert at performing the role of the content wife. For 30 years, she had smiled at dinner parties, hosted family gatherings, and presented herself as the supportive partner to Richard's successful career. She had learned which topics to avoid, which complaints to swallow, which disappointments to bury deep enough that they stopped showing on her face. The truth was that Barbara hadn't been happy in her marriage for at least 20 of those 30 years, maybe longer. The exact moment when love had turned to duty was hard to pinpoint. It had happened gradually, a slow erosion rather than a sudden break. Richard had never been abusive. He had never cheated, never gambled away their money, never done any of the dramatic things that would justify leaving. Instead, he had simply been absent, emotionally unavailable, more interested in his career advancement than in knowing his wife's inner world. He forgot her birthday multiple years. He dismissed her concerns as overreactions. He made major decisions without consulting her, then acted surprised when she was upset. He criticized her appearance, her interests, her opinions, always with a joke attached so he could claim she was being too sensitive if she objected. Barbara had tried to talk to Richard about her unhappiness over the years. Early in the marriage, she had been direct about her needs. But Richard's response had always been the same. He would get defensive, accuse her of being ungrateful for the comfortable life he provided, and ultimately make her feel guilty for even bringing it up. Eventually, Barbara stopped trying. It was easier to swallow her disappointment than to fight the same losing battle over and over. She found fulfillment elsewhere, in her work at the library, where she connected with patrons and colleagues who appreciated her. In her book club, where she could have intellectual conversations Richard never seemed interested in having. In her friendships with other women who understood the particular loneliness of being married to someone who never truly saw you. Richard, for his part, believed their marriage was fine. Good even, they didn't fight much. They had raised 3 successful children. They had built financial security. From his perspective, he had done everything a husband was supposed to do, provide, protect, and maintain stability. If Barbara wasn't effusive in her gratitude, well, that was just her personality. She'd always been reserved. What Richard failed to recognize was that the absence of fighting wasn't the same as the presence of happiness. Barbara didn't argue with him anymore because she had given up hoping he would change. She didn't share her feelings because years of experience had taught her that he wouldn't really listen. She stayed in the marriage out of inertia, fear of disrupting their children's lives, financial practicality, and the weight of 30 years of investment. Their children sensed the disconnection but had normalized it. This was just how mom and dad were, polite, functional, but not particularly warm with each other. Michael had internalized similar patterns in his own marriage, prioritizing work over emotional intimacy. Sarah had vowed never to settle for a passionless partnership. Jennifer still held hope that her parents had some private connection that they simply didn't display publicly. The Family Feud appearance had been Richard's idea. He had recently retired and was looking for ways to stay active and engaged. He thought a family game show appearance would be fun, a chance to show off the family he had built, proof that his life choices had resulted in success. He had no idea that his wife was walking onto that stage carrying 30 years of resentment that she had never fully expressed. Barbara had agreed to participate because she always agreed to what Richard wanted. It was easier than explaining why she didn't want to perform their marriage on national television. It was easier than admitting that standing next to her husband and pretending to be happy felt like the ultimate lie. She told herself it was just a few hours, just one day, and then she could go back to the careful distance that had become her survival strategy. What Barbara didn't anticipate was that sometimes, after years of swallowing your truth, the right question at the right moment can make it impossible to keep lying. The game progressed through the first few rounds normally. The Cooper family competed well, their teamwork reflecting years of practice coordination rather than genuine connection. Steve Harvey moved between families with his characteristic energy, making jokes and keeping the atmosphere light. Then came the question that would shatter the performance. Steve stood at the podium where Barbara and Richard faced each other for a head-to-head round. The question appeared on the board. We asked 100 married people, if you could do it over again, would you marry the same person? It was meant to be a light-hearted question. Most contestants answered with an enthusiastic yes or made a joke about their spouse. But when Barbara looked at that question, something inside her cracked. 30 years of swallowed truths came rushing up. 30 years of pretending she was fine when she wasn't. 30 years of choosing peace over honesty. Steve rang the bell. Richard, you're up first. If you could do it over again, would you marry the same person? Richard smiled confidently. Absolutely, Barbara's been the perfect wife. We've built a great life together. I wouldn't change a thing. The audience made approving sounds. Richard looked pleased with his answer. Steve turned to Barbara with an expectant smile. Barbara, same question. Would you marry Richard again? Barbara looked at her husband. She looked at her children. She looked at Steve Harvey. And she made a decision that she hadn't consciously planned, but that had been building for 30 years. No, Barbara said clearly. I wouldn't. The studio went completely silent. Steve's smile froze. Richard's face drained of color. Their children stood frozen in shock. The audience sat in stunned silence, unsure if they had heard correctly. I'm sorry, what? Steve said, certain he must have misheard. No, Barbara repeated, her voice stronger now. If I could do it over again, I would not marry Richard. I would choose a different path entirely. Richard's shock turned to anger. Barbara, what the hell are you doing? I'm telling the truth, Barbara said, and there was something like relief in her voice. For the first time in 30 years, I'm telling the complete truth instead of the version that keeps everyone comfortable. Steve Harvey, recognizing that something significant was happening, signaled to the producers to pause the game. Barbara, he said gently, that's a strong statement. You want to tell us what's behind it? Barbara took a deep breath. The words she had been holding back for decades started pouring out. I married Richard when I was 30 years old. I thought I was choosing a partner, someone who would see me and value me and build a life with me. What I got was a roommate who pays the bills and occasionally asks what's for dinner. Barbara, this is not the place, Richard started. When is the place, Richard? Barbara's voice rose. We've been married for 30 years and we've never had this conversation. You've never asked if I'm happy. You've never noticed that I stopped trying to talk to you about anything that matters. You think because we don't fight and I show up to your work events and I keep the house running that I'm content. But I'm not. I haven't been happy in this marriage for 20 years. The children looked devastated. Sarah was crying. Michael looked angry. Jennifer stared at her mother like she was seeing a stranger. 20 years? Richard's voice was barely a whisper. You've been unhappy for 20 years and you never said anything. I tried, Barbara said, tears now streaming down her face. I tried so many times in the early years, but every time I tried to tell you I was lonely, you told me I was being dramatic. Every time I asked for more emotional connection, you said I was needy. Every time I complained that you worked too much or forgot something important to me, you made me feel guilty for not appreciating how hard you worked. She turned to face him fully. You didn't want a wife, Richard. You wanted an audience for your success and a manager for your household. You wanted someone to admire you and serve you, not someone to actually know. And I let you turn me into that person because it was easier than fighting you every day. This is unbelievable, Richard said, his voice hardening. I gave you everything, a beautiful home, financial security, a good life. Our children never wanted for anything, and you're going to stand here on national television and tell me it wasn't enough. Material things were never what I needed from you, Barbara said quietly. I needed you to ask about my day and actually listen to the answer. I needed you to remember what matters to me without me having to remind you every time. I needed you to see me as a person with my own dreams and interests, not just as your wife and the children's mother." Steve Harvey stepped forward. The audience was completely silent. This had gone far beyond a game show moment. This was a marriage falling apart in real time. "Richard, Barbara," Steve said carefully, "I think we need to pause the game and talk about what's happening here, because this is clearly about something much bigger than a game show question." Michael spoke up, his voice tight with emotion. "Mom, how could you never say anything? How could you let us think everything was fine?" Barbara looked at her son with anguish. "Because I didn't want to hurt you. Because I thought maybe if I could just make it work, if I could just be good enough at pretending, you would never have to know that your parents' marriage was empty. I stayed for you, all three of you." "Don't put that on us," Sarah said, wiping tears from her face. "Don't tell us you stayed in an unhappy marriage for our sake. That's not fair." "You're right," Barbara said. "It's not fair, none of this is fair, but I'm done pretending. I'm done performing a marriage that died years ago. That question, would I marry Richard again, it made me realize I can't lie anymore, not even to myself." Richard stood there, his carefully constructed image of his successful life crumbling around him. "So what are you saying? You want a divorce? After 30 years, you're just going to throw our marriage away?" "I threw it away." Barbara's voice rose again. "Richard, I have been throwing myself at this marriage for 3 decades. I tried everything to make you see me, to make you care about my inner life, to make you interested in who I am beyond what I can do for you. You're the one who threw it away by never showing up emotionally, by never being curious about your own wife, by treating our marriage like a checkbox on your list of life achievements." Steve Harvey took control of the moment, his voice firm but compassionate. "Okay, everyone take a breath. This family is in crisis, and we're going to handle this with care and respect." He turned to the audience. "What you're witnessing right now is 30 years of unspoken truth coming out all at once. This isn't entertainment. This is real pain that needs to be addressed." He looked at Richard. "Brother, I need you to hear something. Your wife just told you she's been unhappy for 20 years. Your first response was to defend yourself and list the material things you provided. Do you understand that's exactly what she's talking about? She's saying you don't see her, and you proved her point by immediately focusing on what you gave instead of asking about what she needed." Richard's face showed the impact of Steve's words. I thought I was being a good husband. I worked hard. I provided for my family. I thought that's what I was supposed to do." "Providing is important," Steve said, "but it's not the same as partnering. You can give someone everything and still leave them emotionally starving. Barbara is standing here telling you she's been lonely in this marriage. That's not about money or houses. That's about connection." Steve turned to Barbara. "And Barbara, I hear you. I hear that you've been in pain for a long time, but I also need to ask you something. You said you tried to tell Richard early on, but then you stopped. You stayed in this marriage for 20 years being unhappy. At what point does staying become your choice too?" Barbara nodded, accepting the challenge. "You're right. I made a choice to stay. I made a choice to stop fighting and just endure. Part of that was fear of being alone, fear of disrupting my children's lives, fear of financial instability. But part of it was also hope. Some small part of me kept hoping that Richard would wake up one day and actually see me, that he would notice I was unhappy and care enough to ask why." "But he didn't," Steve said gently. "No," Barbara agreed. "He didn't. Because I had gotten so good at hiding it. I became an expert at pretending everything was fine. I created the exact situation I didn't want by being too good at performing contentment." Richard finally spoke, his voice raw. "I honestly had no idea you felt this way. I know you're going to say that's exactly the problem, but I genuinely believed we had a good marriage. We didn't fight. We raised 3 wonderful kids. We built a life together." "We built a life side by side," Barbara corrected. "Not together, side by side. You lived your life, your career, your hobbies, your schedule. I lived mine, raising the children, managing the household, working at the library. We occupied the same space, but we weren't actually connected." Tom, Richard's brother, spoke for the first time. "I tried to tell you, Richard. Years ago, I tried to tell you that you were taking Barbara for granted. You told me I didn't understand how marriage worked, that Barbara was fine." Richard turned to his brother with a mixture of anger and pain. "You knew she was unhappy." "I could see it," Tom said. "Anyone paying attention could see it. The way she would light up talking to other people and then go quiet when you entered the room. The way she stopped trying to tell you about her day. The way she found reasons to be busy whenever you were home, but you didn't want to see it, so you didn't." Jennifer, the youngest, spoke through her tears. "Is this why you always told me never to settle? Why you always said I should make sure anyone I married was actually interested in who I am?" Barbara looked at her daughter with love and sadness. "Yes, sweetheart. I didn't want you to make the same mistake I did. I didn't want you to wake up 20 years into a marriage and realize you disappeared into someone else's life." Steve addressed the family as a whole. "Here's what I'm seeing. Richard, you married Barbara and then went on autopilot. You assumed that as long as you checked the boxes, good provider, faithful husband, stable presence, The marriage would take care of itself. You didn't do the ongoing work of actually knowing your wife as she changed and grew over 30 years. He looked at Barbara. And Barbara, you stopped advocating for yourself. You decided it was easier to be lonely in the marriage than to keep fighting for connection. You built a separate life where you found fulfillment, and you let your husband remain ignorant of your unhappiness. Steve's voice grew firmer. Now you're both standing here 30 years in and you finally told each other the truth. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Because you can't unknow what's been said here today. Richard looked at Barbara, really looked at her maybe for the first time in years. I don't want to lose you. I know I've been absent. I know I haven't been the husband you needed, but I don't want our marriage to end. Then you need to change, Barbara said. Not superficial change, real change. You need to become curious about who I am. You need to ask questions and actually listen to the answers. You need to treat me like a person you want to know, not just someone who exists in your orbit. And you, Steve said to Barbara, need to stop pretending. If something bothers you, you need to say it. If you're unhappy, you need to speak up. You can't expect Richard to read your mind, especially when you've spent years hiding your feelings. Barbara nodded. You're right. I've been complicit in this dynamic. I taught Richard that I would accept emotional neglect by accepting it for so long without consequence. The Cooper family never finished their family feud game that day. The episode that aired was unlike anything the show had broadcast before. An hour-long special about a marriage that had survived 30 years but had never truly thrived. The producers, recognizing the significance of what had unfolded, chose to present it as a documentary about long-term marriage and the dangers of emotional disconnection. The response was unprecedented. Thousands of viewers, many in long-term marriages themselves, reached out to share their own stories of enduring rather than enjoying their partnerships. Marriage counselors reported a surge in couples seeking help, many of them explicitly citing Barbara's confession as the wake-up call they needed. For the Cooper family, the aftermath was difficult and messy. Richard and Barbara entered intensive marriage counseling. The first few sessions were brutal. Richard had to confront the reality that his idea of being a good husband, providing financially and being faithful, had been woefully incomplete. He had to face how his emotional unavailability had slowly starved his wife's love for him. Barbara had to own her role in the dynamic. She had to acknowledge that by hiding her unhappiness and building a separate life, she had made it impossible for Richard to address problems he didn't know existed. She had to learn to be honest about her needs in real time instead of accumulating resentments in silence. Their therapist gave them homework assignments that forced them out of their established patterns. Richard had to ask Barbara one meaningful question every day and listen to her answer without offering solutions or deflecting. Barbara had to share one honest feeling every day, even if it was uncomfortable or might lead to conflict. The exercises felt awkward at first. 30 years of learned behavior doesn't change overnight. Richard would forget to ask questions or would interrupt with his own thoughts. Barbara would hold back her honest feelings out of habit. But slowly, painfully, they began to communicate in ways they never had before. Richard made a discovery that shocked him. He had never really known his wife. 30 years of marriage, and he couldn't name her favorite author, didn't know what she dreamed about, had no idea what brought her joy beyond the basics. He had been married to a woman he had never been curious about. The realization was humbling and devastating. Barbara discovered that speaking her truth, even when it caused conflict, was less painful than swallowing it. The anxiety she'd felt for years, the constant monitoring of what she could and couldn't say, began to ease as she practiced honesty. She learned that Richard could actually handle her authentic feelings when she gave him the chance. The children processed their own feelings in therapy. Michael had to confront how he had replicated his father's emotional distance in his own marriage. Sarah grappled with her fear of commitment, recognizing it stemmed from watching her parents' hollow partnership. Jennifer struggled with feeling betrayed by her mother's decades of pretending everything was fine. 6 months after the family feud taping, Steve Harvey invited the Cooper family back for a follow-up. The difference was visible immediately. Richard and Barbara sat closer together, but their body language was more authentic, less performative closeness, more genuine comfort. When they spoke about their marriage now, they spoke honestly about the work it was requiring. I can't say our marriage is great now, Barbara told Steve and the audience. We're rebuilding from the ground up. We're learning how to actually be partners instead of just cohabitants. Some days are better than others, but we're trying in a way we never tried before. Richard spoke with a humility that hadn't been present during their first appearance. I spent 30 years thinking I was doing everything right because I measured success by the wrong metrics. I thought money and stability were enough. I never understood that Barbara needed me to be emotionally present, to be genuinely interested in her as a person. He looked at his wife. I'm learning who Barbara actually is for the first time. It's embarrassing to admit that after 30 years, I'm just now asking questions about her dreams, her fears, her inner life. But I'm grateful she's giving me the chance to know her. Steve asked the question everyone was wondering. Are you going to make it? Is this marriage going to survive? Barbara and Richard looked at each other before Barbara answered. We don't know yet. We're taking it one day at a time. What I do know is that we're finally being honest with each other. Whether that honesty saves our marriage or helps us end it peacefully, I don't know. But either way, it's better than pretending. The Cooper family's story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of autopilot in marriage. Relationship experts used it to illustrate how marriages can die slowly from neglect, how good intentions without genuine effort create hollow partnerships, and how years of unspoken resentment can accumulate into relationship-ending revelations. But it also became a story of hope, hope that even after 30 years of disconnection, two people could choose to truly see each other for the first time. Hope that honesty, even when it's painful and late, is better than comfortable lies. Hope that transformation is possible when both people are willing to do the difficult work. 1 year after their family feud confession, Richard and Barbara were still together. Their marriage didn't look like the polished performance they had presented to the world for 3 decades. It looked messier, more honest, more vulnerable. They argued now, real arguments about real issues instead of the silent resentment that had characterized their earlier years. But they also laughed together in ways they hadn't since the early years of their marriage. Richard had learned to ask Barbara about her book club discussions and actually engage with her thoughts. Barbara had learned to tell Richard when his behavior hurt her instead of swallowing it. They were learning to be married for real instead of just performing the role. Their children saw the change and began addressing issues in their own relationships more honestly. Michael started asking his wife deeper questions and actually listening. Sarah decided to give commitment another chance, having seen that honesty could transform even the most disconnected relationships. Jennifer learned that her mother's strength wasn't in pretending everything was fine, but in finally admitting when it wasn't. The story of Barbara's devastating "no" on Family Feud spread far beyond the show's typical audience. It was discussed in marriage retreats, shared in therapy sessions, referenced in academic papers about long-term relationships. That single word, "no," became shorthand for the importance of honesty even when honesty destroys the comfortable narrative we've built. Steve Harvey reflected on the experience in interviews, calling it one of the most profound moments of his television career. People think game shows are just entertainment, he said. But sometimes you ask a simple question and someone gives you a truth that changes everything. Barbara could have lied. She could have said yes and kept pretending. Instead, she chose honesty after 30 years of performance. That took more courage than most people will ever understand. For couples watching their story, the message was clear. Autopilot kills marriages slowly. Financial security isn't the same as emotional connection. Lack of conflict isn't the same as presence of happiness. And sometimes it takes a simple question to reveal that what looked like a successful marriage was actually two people enduring in parallel isolation. The Cooper family's journey reminds us that marriage requires ongoing effort and genuine curiosity. Richard's mistake wasn't dramatic betrayal. It was the quiet neglect of assuming his wife would always be there without needing to be truly known. Barbara's mistake wasn't in leaving. It was in staying silent so long that the truth, when it finally emerged, came out as an explosion rather than a conversation. After 30 years of marriage, one question destroyed the room. But in the destruction, space was created for something new, messy, uncertain, but finally honest. Barbara and Richard didn't win money on Family Feud that day. But they won something more important, the chance to finally stop performing and start being real with each other, even if that reality was painful. If this story reminded you that honesty, even when it hurts, is better than comfortable lies, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We share these powerful Family Feud moments because they teach us that marriage isn't about pretending. It's about showing up authentically, asking genuine questions, and doing the hard work of actually knowing and being known by your partner.